Good day, learners. How are you? Previously, we appreciated and understood a classic literature from China. But here on, let's get to know another literature from East Asia. Let's have Japanese literature, but we will focus on one of its famous genres, which is a haiku. Let's begin. Japanese literature started with the introduction of kanji from the Asian mainland, and because of kanji, writing became possible in China. Japanese did not have letters until Chinese introduced their letters in 2nd or 3rd century. After then, the Japanese started using Chinese letters. Of course, ancient Japanese used these letters for learning Chinese progress culture. As you know, Chinese letters are basically ideograms that were originally pictograph, and every single letter has its own meaning. Consequently, the only literary language was classical Chinese to begin with. Later, the characters were adapted to write Japanese, creating what is known as the Manyagana, the earliest form of kana or syllabic writing. Now, the modern Japanese writing system uses the following main scripts. We have the kanji, or the letters from China, and then later they transformed these Chinese letters into kana, or a pair of syllabaries. And it is divided into two categories. We have the hiragana and the katakana. Hiragana is used for Japanese words, while katakana is used for foreign loanwords and sometimes to replace kanji or hiragana for emphasis. Since the late 1800s, Japanese writings have become increasingly familiar abroad. Genres such as haiku verse, no drama, and the Japanese novel have had a substantial impact on literature in many parts of the world. Japanese literature is one of the major literatures of the world, comparable to English literature in age and variety. But in this lesson, we will focus on haiku among those genres. The question is, what is a haiku? A haiku is one of the most important forms of traditional poetry. Many themes, when you are going to write a haiku, include nature, feelings, or experiences. Here are some important elements of haiku. First, it should be simple, direct, non-metaphorical language. Don't use abstract words. Second, captures a transitory insight or moment in time. It is called saturi or the aha moment. Next, it contains a kigo, an image of nature that evokes a particular season. Usually occurs in the 1st or 3rd line of a haiku. And lastly, a haiku usually contains a cutting, or the cutting divides the haiku into two parts with a certain imaginative distance between the two sections, but the two sections must remain, to a degree, independent of each other. Both sections must enrich the understanding of the other one. It uses punctuation marks like dash or ellipsis. Now, pivot words, or word pivoting, changes or turns the direction of the poem in some way. Haiku today is a 17-syllable verse form consisting of 3 metrical units. The first line should contain 5 syllables, the second line have 7 syllables, and the third line have 5 syllables. It's almost the same from traditional pattern, but this is quite problematic for those who will write in English. Now let's try to have an example. This example was made by the famous poet in Japan named Basho Matsuo. Notice that in this Japanese version of haiku, it follows the 5-7-5 metrical pattern. But when you're going to translate this one, it doesn't follow the rule. Also, with the English version, we can now understand that this is actually a haiku because going back to the elements I discussed earlier, notice that this haiku uses simple and direct language. Also, it contains a kigo, or an image of nature, where the frog probably represents the season of spring. And aside from that, it uses the technique of cutting through the punctuation mark dash. So that's how a haiku looks like. But let me show you how to write a haiku. How to write a haiku in English. In Japanese, the rules for how to write haiku are clear and will not be discussed here. In foreign languages, there exists no consensus in how to write haiku poems. Simply put, that there is no possible or restricted rule on how you are going to write haiku poems. Anyway, let's take a look at the basic knowledge in writing a haiku. What to write about? Haiku poems can describe almost anything, but you seldom find themes which are too complicated for normal people's recognition and understanding. Some of the most thrilling haiku poems describe daily situation in a way that it gives a reader a brand new experience of a well-known situation. Haiku poems consist of respectively 5, 7, and 5 syllables in 3 units. In Japanese, this convention is a must, but in English, which has a variation in the length of syllables, this can be sometimes problematic or difficult. And lastly, the cutting divides the haiku into 2 parts, right? With a certain imaginative distance between the 2 sections. But how are you going to use the technique of cutting in English haiku poems? To make this cutting in English, either the first or the second line ends normally with a colon, long dash, or ellipsis. So those are the things you have to keep in mind in writing a haiku. But always remember, use simple, direct language and words that evoke a season. Try to incorporate a cutting by using punctuation marks like ellipsis or the long dash, or pivot words so that the halves of your haiku seems to speak to each other. So there you go. You learned a little bit about Japanese literature and what is a haiku. I hope you learned something from me today. This is your teacher, Teacher Joy. Thank you and see you again.